Is it possible to do this when your intention is to do this? Hello, my name is Magnar Nordahl. I am a captain and instructor on Yeti aircraft. The preliminary report for the accident for Yeti Airlines 691 has just arrived, and it's really sad to read the story behind this. So the accident happened with Yeti Airlines on 15th of January 2023. This was a flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara airport, and this is a brand new airport. It was opened only 2 weeks before the accident. The old Pokhara airport is located just a few nautical miles to the west of the new airport. And the flight from Kathmandu to Pokhara is very short, and it will be natural to land on runway 30, because that means you will fly straight in. On this flight there were 2 captains on board. One captain was doing familiarization training. This captain sat in the left seat and was pilot flying. In the right seat was an instructor who was then supervising the flight. And as they got closer to Pokhara and get in contact with the tower, they were told that they will be given an approach to runway 30. But instead they asked for a visual approach to runway 12 in the opposite direction, which was granted. The weather was very good, very light winds, 3 to 5 knots, and good visibility and just a few clouds. And according to the report in section 113, they at 10:56:12 they extended the flaps to 15 degrees position and selected the landing gear down. At 10:56:27 pilot flying disengaged the autopilot at an altitude of 721 feet above the ground level. Flying a visual approach at this altitude is a bit low, but there might be some reason for it. A standard visual approach is flown at 1500 feet above the airport. The pilot flying then called for flaps 30 at 10:56:32, and the pilot monitoring replied flaps 30 and descending. The flight data recorder data did not record any flap surface movement at that time. Instead, the propeller rotation speed, NP, on both engines decreased simultaneously to less than 25%, and the torque started decreasing to 0%, which is consistent with both propellers going into the feathered condition. The flight data recorder cannot register rotation speed below 25%, which means it can be anything from 25% down to 0%. Before we continue, let me give a brief description of the engine. If you want to know more about the engine and how it works, you can watch those videos. The core of the engine is a low pressure shaft with a compressor and turbine, and a high pressure shaft with a compressor and turbine. Those shafts rotate independently of each other, and the rotation speed is shown as NH and NL. 100% NH is about 40,000 RPM. The compressors squeeze the air and send it to the combustion chamber, where fuel is mixed with the air and burned. This gives energy to drive the compressors, and we call this a gas turbine. The gas turbine drives a DC generator, which provides power to many of the systems in the aircraft. Then we have a third turbine called a free turbine. It is connected to a reduction gearbox and a propeller. The rotation speed is shown as NP, and 100% is 1200 RPM. An AC generator is attached to the gearbox. Since the propeller rotates with variable RPM, the generator produces AC power with variable frequency. Therefore, the generator is called AC valve generator. The AC generator is online when NP is more than 65%. For example, after landing, when we are taxi in, we will feather the propeller and NP will drop down to about 14%. That means the AC valve generator will go offline. The torque indicator is the primary indications for the power of the aircraft. The power is defined as torque multiplied by NP. On the cockpit voice recorder, the microphone recorded a single master caution chime at 10:56:36. And I assume this chime was triggered because the AC valve generators went offline. And those generators are powering the hydraulic pumps and some ice protection systems like the windshield heating and pitot heat. So they should get 3 alerts on the crew alert panel for electric, for hydraulic and anti-ice. The flight crew then carried out the before landing checklist before starting left turn onto the base leg. On that checklist, you check that you have flap set for landing. And apparently, both pilots missed that point, which means they didn't check the flap indicator properly, because it should have been at 30, but it was at 15. The report doesn't tell exactly what was said between the pilots. We must have to wait for the final report for this, I assume. It only mentioned a few comments by the pilots, but we don't know exactly what was said. At 10:56:50, when the radio altitude call out for 500 feet was annunciated, this is an automatic call from the radio altimeter, another click sound was heard. A click sound can be quite a lot of different things. It can be the movement of a lever, like the flap lever. It can be condition levers. It can be a switch, like the taxi takeoff light switch. So we don't know exactly what that click means. And the pilot flying consulted the pilot monitoring on whether to continue the left turn, and the pilot monitoring replied to continue the turn, which means both pilots had a lot of focus out of the window. It's possible that the flying pilot had never flown this procedure before, since it's a new airport, and this was a flight with an instructor. Which means you have a high workload, because you have to find some landmarks you can use as a reference for later flights. So therefore, I understand why the pilot made this question. And also, pilot flying asked pilot monitoring whether to continue descent, and the pilot monitoring responded it was not necessary and instructed to apply a little power. At 10:56:54, another click was heard, followed by flap surface movement to the 30 degrees position. So this happened more than 20 seconds after they were supposed to set flap 30, and when both condition levers apparently were moved to feather position. So now the flaps 30 was set, but what did the pilot tell each other? So far we don't know. When air traffic control gave the clearance for landing at 10:57:07, pilot flying mentioned twice that there was no power coming from the engines. Again, we don't know what the pilot monitoring, who was the instructor, we don't know the response from him. If he responded at all to these calls. If you have no power, what will be the most logical thing to do? I will check the engine indications, and if I see torque 0, NP 0, I will take a look power levers, condition levers, and if they have discovered a mistake here and put the condition levels back to auto, they could have saved the aircraft and all on board. At 10:57:11, the power levers were advanced first to 62 degrees and then to maximum power position. It was followed by a click sound at 10:57:16. 1 second after the click sound, the aircraft was at the initiation at the last turn, that means this turn from base to final, at 368 feet above ground level. The high pressure turbine speed, NH, on both engines increased from 73 to 77%. When the propeller is feathered, the gas turbine continues to run at idle power, and moving the power lever doesn't change that very much. The gas turbine continues to drive the DC generator, and which supplies power to all the instruments, so everything appears normal, except for those orders that was already given. So it's a bit strange that they didn't understand what happened. I think the workload must be been too high because of the focus on what's outside the window. And I think pilot flying must have been start to struggle to keep the aircraft flying, because without power, you're losing altitude. It is noted that the pilot flying handed over control of the aircraft to pilot monitoring at 10:57:18. 2 seconds later, at 10:57:20, the pilot monitoring, who was previously the pilot flying, repeated again that there was no power from the engines. At 10:57:24, when the aircraft was at 311 feet above ground level, the stick shaker was activated, warning the crew that the aircraft angle of attack increased up to the stick shaker threshold. So that's an alert before the aircraft is stalled. And shortly after, the aircraft stalled, the left wing flipped, and the aircraft crashed a few seconds after this. There were 72 people on board, and all of them perished. The accident report indicates very strongly that both condition levers were moved to feather instead of the flap lever was moved to flap 30. And I find it unbelievable that this even could happen, because you see the shape of the flap lever is shaped like a wing, and the condition levers are more squared, and there are two of them. And to move the flap lever, you have to put your hand over the flap lever and grab one side with the thumb and the other side with the other fingers and lift it up and then move it. To move the condition levers, there is a trigger lever underneath, and you have to move both, you have to put your hand over the condition levers and put two fingers, one of each trigger lever, and lift them up, and then you can move the condition lever. And it's unbelievable for me that this even could happen. But I think the investigators must look at the workload of the pilots during this phase of the flight. We don't know what was said in the cockpit between the pilots, and therefore we cannot draw a 100% conclusion about really what happened. But I can explain how the systems work. So the condition lever has several functions. In the most aft position, it's labeled fuel SO, that means fuel shut off. In this position, the fuel supply to the engine is cut. To start the engine, you move the condition lever up to feather position. This opens up for the fuel flow, and the engine starts to run. And when the start is completed, you move the condition lever to auto, and the RPM will now be controlled by the electronic system called the Propeller Electronic Control, or PEC. And as you increase the power, the RPM will start to increase. And the RPM depends on the position of a power management selector. In TO, that means takeoff. And when you increase the power for takeoff, the RPM will go up to 100%. which is 1200 RPM. And after takeoff, when you are at a safe altitude, you move the power management to climb, and now the RPM reduced to 82% to reduce the noise. And all this happens automatically. So for the rest of the flight, the condition level will stay on auto until you have landed. And you're about to shut down the engines. You will move the condition levels back to feather, and after that to fuel shut-off. In this specific case, it appears that the condition levels were moved from auto to feather, and in feather position the blades are angled in a way that they create minimum drag. That means the leading edge is pointing towards the wind. And in this position, the propellers cannot produce any thrust. In case of an engine failure, the propeller will be feathered, either automatically, if it's happened during takeoff phase, or a go around. In all other cases, it will be done manually by the pilots. And this ensures that we have minimum drag and best performance when you're flying single engine. The role of the pilot flying is to fly the aircraft. And on a visual approach, the airport will be on the flying pilot's side. So the pilot can easily see the runway all the way through the maneuver, but the pilot monitoring will have less visibility towards the airport because this pilot is sitting on the other side. And the most important part for pilot monitoring is to monitor the flight speed, altitudes, track, and configuration, and call out if there is anything that is not right. Apparently, this didn't happen, but as I said, we had to wait for the final report before we can draw the conclusions here. When you read chapter 2 in the report, it says the investigation will focus on A, the circumstances under which both propellers went into the feather condition, B, human factors. And yes, human factors will play a very important role in this investigation. The investigators really had to dig into, try to understand what was going on, what was the mindset of the pilots, how did they communicate together, what was the perception they had. Because it's a very, very unique situation here, and I find it unbelievable that this even could happen. So I hope the investigators really can dig so deep that they really can find the root cause, whatever it is. If this is related to company culture or individual culture, I hope they will find it out. It's very, very sad, and it's terrible for all involved, especially the relatives and friends of those who are deceased. And they deserve the best possible investigation and an honest review of everything. Okay, that is all for this time. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day and happy landing.